Hey there, beautiful people. My name is Tim Lee. Welcome to Draw Too Much and another Draw Too Much sketch lesson. That's what I call all my lessons that have to do with drawing, period, just because I created that a long time ago and I actually really enjoy calling it that. So my Draw Too Much sketch lessons. And today I want to take a look at one of my students' pieces. This is Eddie, and he was taking a class from another artist who is amazing. And I love this other artist's work. His name is Zai Ding, if I'm saying his name correctly, and his stuff is just mesmerizing. And so when my student Eddie came back to the classes that we've been doing, he was just so excited to get ready, and he created what you see here. And you gotta admit, he did a pretty decent job. You can see a lot of great tones, a lot of translucency in the skin and things like that. There's a lot of great movement there, but for some reason it feels a little off, and I think he was feeling that same thing. So I want to show you a technique that I utilize when I decide to try and do something a little bit more realism, which is rare, but when I do, I want to be able to entice myself to continue to work, because realism is not my thing. When I sit down and I draw, I have one style that I use, and that's because that's the style I'm known for, and I've stuck with it over the years, and that's why people hire me, is because they know my style. But when I get that wild hair to do something unique and different, then I move towards that. And when it comes down to it, I keep thinking of another one of my students whose name is Tack. His stuff is amazing. He is incredible, and just you can sense his style and his persona, and he understands a lot about saturation and understands a lot about color and tone. Beautiful, beautiful work out of Tack. And when he and I talk a lot about the idea of contrast and how important contrast is, and what contrast can do for your art. And when it comes down to it, I think that is the main issue that Eddie here has bumped into, is a lack of contrast and a lack of willing to try and push some colors to make it work. So in saying that, this is not going to be an incredibly long tutorial slash critique. It's just going to be a demonstration of how I would slightly adjust things, or how I would go about processing this. Now, there's going to be two methods that I'm going to utilize. One is a eyedropper tool technique that a lot of artists do use, and then another one's going to be just an eyeball technique, trying to get the color as close as we can. Both of these work fine. Depending on if you're a purist or not, you may prefer one technique over the other. You know, it all comes down to how much you are to call it your original work. A lot of people find that sampling off of another image, getting the color tones off another image is a cheater move, while others say that, well, that's just fine, that's part of what digital is about. That's up to you to decide, and remember, there's no rules in art. I do challenge you to try and train your eye to see color. So in saying that, let's get down to packs of brass, as they say in Guardians, Rise of the Guardians, Legend of the Guardians of the Legend. I don't know. You know what I'm talking about. If you don't, who cares? So let's go ahead and have some fun here. The first thing I want to do is I want to try and just eyeball this as best I can here, okay? And that's going to be to try and find the colors that I'm seeing in the image on the left and try and replicate them on the right and see about what I can do to create those effects. So there's several things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for the highest saturation color, and I'm looking for the highest highlight color, I'm looking for the darkest saturation color, and I'm looking for the darkest shadow color. So that's basically 4 different elements that I'm going to be hunting for. Okay, so as I'm looking here, I'm seeing areas of almost pure black. So having pure black is going to be a color that I will be utilizing in my processing of this image, okay? The next thing I want to do is I want to look at, say, an area of high saturation. Okay, there's a lot of saturation, specifically here around the forehead area here, where, yes, there's a high light point, but there seems to be a redness, in a way, here on some parts of the face and certain parts, and that seems like a heavy saturation of skin tone. So I'm just going to eyeball this and try and find something that is a high saturation point. It doesn't need to be perfect, because in the painterly approach, you're going to be doing a lot of finagling, a lot of reworking, a lot of readjusting to get that flow. So I'm going to go ahead and call that close to it, and maybe a bit darker, but we'll stick with that just to make a point. Now, I'm looking for a highlight point. And usually I look at the tip of the nose for the highest highlight point, and there is a highlight point right there. So I'm going to go ahead and just try and, with roughly the same palette, try and find that highlight point and try and make sure that it's somewhat reasonable. I might even take it just a little bit closer to something more like that. And then, so we got the darkest dark, we got a highest saturation, we got a highest highlight, and now we need the, and actually if you look at the forehead there, there's even a pure white per se on the forehead. But then we're going to look at a darkest saturation, and the darkest saturation could also lead to that black as well. But I'm seeing some other tones around here as well, especially around the eyes. A whole different tone, a whole different shadow that seems to have a touch of purple in it, that I'm going to try and replicate ever so slightly. And this is all to the eye of the beholder as much as possible. And then we need to do this for several different areas. For the lips as well, it's going to have some slightly different tone. I feel like I can maybe get away with this for the lips. And then for the highlight of that is going to be a much higher pink to white point here, kind of like that. And then between that, we'll figure all that out as we go along. Now, as I've made that construct, I've made this process of a couple different colors that I intend to use as I go through this. I want to go ahead and just set myself where this is going to play out. So on a new layer here, this is where things are going to get a little messy, but it's more about the demonstration than it is about the final. How I would go about moving forward with this. So taking the highlight point, I would immediately put that in where the highlight point would be. And what I like to do in this sort of situation is I like to use a brush that has a low brush density, okay? And my goal is I'm just gonna paint in a little bit here and there. And I'm gonna find these highlight points, and I'm just gonna shoot this tone in here, in those areas of highlight. And then maybe I'll grab some white directly off my background and toss that in there. So I want the highest highlight points, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to put that in several areas. And whoops, let me make sure I'm grabbing the right color here. So these points where I'm seeing a lot of highlight point, I'll just go ahead and scrub them in. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Like I said, this is all going to be down to just playing it by ear, as he draws on the ear. But I want you to take a look. Eddie actually did a really good job, because I'm going to a lot of the same areas that Eddie went to with my highlight points here. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw a bit of this in, and you might immediately start to see a difference. If you look at the thumbnail over here in the corner of this image, it already looks like it's popping differently, and that's the key point there. It's amazing what you can do with just one color, throwing it in there, and just see what that does to the thumbnail. If we zoom out of this here, we'll be able to see that effect begin to come into play. But we're still dealing with just a very flat blue tone image, and I feel like it needs some life. And here's the thing. Please remember, key feature here is this is art. This is not a picture. This is not a photograph. Do not try to make it look like a photograph. And that's my honest opinion. Don't make it look like a photograph. If you try to make it look like a photograph, what's the point? Take a picture. Make this yours. Leave the strokes in there. Leave the painterly lines in there. Leave mistakes in there. Let them show through and cause beauty to the effect. Let it have that final say that I am me, and I want to be me, and I want to have my own look. There's nothing wrong with that. So I'm going in here now, and I'm starting to add in some just larger tones of this saturated point here. And it, like I said, doesn't have to be perfect. I'm simply applying as I go. And if I feel like the color's not quite right, which it certainly doesn't look quite right, I'll adjust accordingly in a little bit. And I'll go find another tone and I'll paint that in. But for right now, I'm just using this to kind of build up the areas that I think are going to have that saturation. All right, now, looking at the dark side here, one thing that we see is that the face just doesn't go anywhere. It just disappears in this blandness. It needs more. So I'm going to go ahead and take my darkest darkness, which would be black in this case, and the areas where I'm seeing pure black, I'll start shooting that in here. Okay, and I'm just using the pencil here, but this is just, you can do whatever tool you want to use that gets the point across and makes you feel like you're getting somewhere with it. But draw in, and then if you need to, blend out. There's nothing wrong with blending. So we can put in some pretty heavy lines here all the way through this. And we can see that that black even continues up all the way to the tip of the head here, and all the way around the other side. And here we can see a heavy black point right here on this part of the face. We can see that it continues all the way around here. And it looks like it readjusts a little bit here. Kind of like that. Now, I'm going off of his main artwork. If there's adjustments to make, then you would make some of those on your own side of things. I'm choosing not to at this point. Hi, Zozo. I don't know if you guys have met Zoe. She might not be visible right now, but she's my Great Dane, and she's gone. I'm sorry. Okay. Anyway, let's continue here. So we get all this put in here, looking at where some of the stuff is going to go. And I'm noticing that it kind of gradients out. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint some of that in. And the point that I'm making here is wherever there's absolutely hard black, like full deep black, I will put that full deep black there. Not planning to keep it there forever, but I'm going to go ahead and put it all the way there. And the reason why is I want to build a place where I can build a stair-step technique. What is a stair-step technique? Well, that's just what I call it. But have you ever heard of a step gradient? Okay, well, in a lot of art forms, a step gradient is where you have one color and then a step above or a step below, step above or a step below, blah, 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 blah. And so it goes from that light to the dark in steps, and you can see those steps visually. And that's the kind of thing that I do. So when I feel like I got this roughly built up the way that I want to build it, then we can start figuring out some of those stair-stepping techniques. An area that I think that's really going to show is in the idea of the eyes here. So like right here, and actually I need to take this a lot darker. I'm going to go ahead and start painting in even darker. Start painting in where the absolute darkest points are, and I'm going to connect this down here. Kind of like that. Same on the other side. And all this can be readjusted back and made a little bit more balanced, but just to prove the point, I'm going whole hog here. I want the most intense colors that I can get, the most intense saturations I can get. Wherever I'm seeing these, I'll just drop this in. Down here underneath the eye is pretty heavy. Okay. And then I'm going to see some pretty intense highlight points just tucked in here as well. So while I got those, I'll go grab that original highlight point that I already picked, and we'll start dropping that in here as well. And you can see he's already done some of this, but the thing that I'm doing is I'm over-exaggerating those highlight points, with the final goal being that if it's an area of gradient, I can gradient out of it. If it's an area that isn't gradient, I can leave them strong and bold, and it will show in a final decision of the artwork. Like right here, this area on this part of the eye is not very intense. So I can go ahead and have it intense, and then what I'll do is with the skin tone that I've picked, let's say that I use his skin tone, all I need to do to calm it down, if it just doesn't feel quite right, is just do a couple quick little strokes directly over top of it. And if that doesn't feel quite right, a couple more. And I can just fade it in time until it starts to feel right, and it starts to have that process. And like I said, once again, look at the thumbnail in the top right. The saturated skin tone is a little overdone, but you gotta admit, you can see a heavy contrast in this. And you can even see a heavy contrast in the piece I'm working on in comparison to what he originally had, which we have hiding right here. So now, to calm down some of the saturation that I have here that is really oversaturated, so that would tell me that my saturation color might be a little overdone for my highlight saturation, I'm just going to take my blender and I'm just going to start blending this. And I'm just going to blend it so it loses its texture, and it's going to start fading into this face. Okay? And then if I'm not feeling that it's calming it down, which right now I feel like it's doing something decent enough, what I can do is I can start painting over top of that with a different skin tone and blend that until I make that final piece, until I get to that final goal. So if I select a key area, and I am going to use my water pick tool here, my color picker tool here, and I'm going to select a range between the two. Grab my pencil, and I'll take it fairly large, and I'm just going to paint right over top of it with the pencil. And I'll take that through most of the forehead here. Okay, and then I need to build up the highlight point here, so I'm going to start selecting with my eyedropper tool. This is the key thing. And I'm going to start building those tones into what I have. Your goal is to select the highest highlight and draw into the other tone. Select the highest saturation and draw into the other tone. And you're going to do this over and over and over again, selecting from one to the other. And you're just going to keep doing this until it starts to blend. And if it's not really blending, then you can use the blender tool. But the goal, I would say, is to find a natural thing that happens on its own. And it's really fun when you have that happen. Okay, we can take that highlight here into this part of the nose here a bit more. And we need to start creating that shape, that roundedness of that shape. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in with this same tone where the nose is going to start adjusting down. And then using that deep shadow that I have here from the eye, I'll start drawing in where that nose needs to start taking that shape. And you can really start seeing it, especially on the thumbnail. But if I just do this a little bit over time, it really begins to give it a structure. And it can make a whole difference. And if I need to, I can add just some of that darkness into the highlight to start rotating that shape over and start bringing it in and folding it in. And then don't forget, you can use your blender. You just use it sparingly. To overblend will remove texture, and texture is such a beautiful thing if you're going to go for realism. So you really have to be gentle. Don't be afraid to turn down the opacity of your blender tool. Okay, and also go with the structure of the stroke. So instead of going through and blending in, what you can do instead is go with the texture and leave that texture in there, but just blend the tone by going with the grain and not against the grain. If you go against the grain, then it blends into itself a bit too much. If you go with the grain, it just kind of works the colors in a little bit at a time. And that would be my preference, because I love texture in final work. That will make all the difference, in my opinion. Alright, so I feel like the skin tone still is a little bit too orange. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a hint of red to this. And I'm going to go ahead and paint in some of this red. And it still might be a very oversaturated red, but I'm just going to toss a little bit in there for giggles. And I'm even going to take it and bring it along the sides of the nose here, going over my shadow just slightly. Okay, and on the same way, we'll go the other direction. And let's go down this way and down this way. Now, here's the thing about art. It's going to take a long time to flesh this out. And that's literally the term. To properly flesh this out and really try to give it that life, you do need to be able to go in. If you look at some painters, and there's a wonderful show, I think it's like Year's Best Painter or something like that. I found it on YouTube. And it's a wonderful show, and you'll see some painters with tiny little brushes going in with individual dots, and it's beautiful what they're coming up with. But it sometimes does mean going down to individual little dots. So if you start with big brushes and you lay in the big tones, and then you go smaller and smaller and smaller, that's usually the best way to go. So I'm going to go ahead here now and select the highlight point of the nose. And I'm just going to gently pull some of that into the nose as it comes up. And I'm not going to do much. I'm just trying to build up that area of highlight. I'm trying to build contrast. Okay, and I'm putting it in places where you might not exactly see it in the final artwork. You might not see it in the original image. But if I can build it up and then chill it back because it's overcompensating, that would be a much better move to do. Another thing here is there's not enough contrast on the bottom of this nose in comparison to here. There's a sharp edge here of this shadow in comparison to here. So what we'll do is we'll go in a bit deeper. And once again, contrast. So I can take this nose a lot deeper into the darkness with some of the black here into the nostrils. And once you put your darkest point in there, then you can start carving away and build what you're seeing on the other side if you're using your image directly next to it for reference. Your goal, though, is to see the deepest tone and try and figure out how to match it a little bit over time. Because I'm seeing that this black is just a dot in both nostrils, barely anything. So that means I have to calm down the overall design of the nostrils in the other side of the face too. And I can make my brush a lot smaller now as well. And I notice that there's a little bit of an upside down M, a W right there. And so I can take that and I can draw in a little bit of that W and maybe overdo the darkness just slightly so I can make sure that I'm going wide enough. Kind of like that, maybe more so. And if I'm finding I'm struggling, even make my brush slightly bigger and flesh it out a little over time instead of trying to do it in one big swoop. Okay, obviously that's a bit overcompensating, but what I can do is I can go and I can grab right on the tip of the darkest point and right on the tip of the lightest point, right here on the edge, I can grab a middle tone and then I can come right back over top and I can color out whatever down to that point, and look at what that does. It gives a lot more contrast now, and if it's still a little too much, just go back over it again and just chill it out an extra little tick or two. So you can see kind of how this works. My ultimate goal would be to go with the highest highlights first and the darkest shadows first, and then take all the colors and blend them together, build the step together. If I haven't made myself clear, I want to demonstrate that to you in one more way before we go today. Let me just do a couple little things here because I'm just having too much fun with this. And I'm not saying that this is the way that it must be done. You'll come up with your own theories, and everyone has a different process. But in time, you can create something absolutely beautiful and mesmerizing if you're willing to work with the lines and let them work with you and work on your construct. So let's just chill that out there a little bit. And we can just see in just a little bit amount of time how much extra depth you can build onto that face in comparison to what it was before. And if you continue to work it and build it and baby it and find those high saturation points, like I didn't quite do in the overall high saturations, but that's because I'm not taking the time to build that, you can do something really amazing. Here's your goal. Let's just look up here in general in this white area up here. And we're going to use this color right here. And I'm going to do it at its highest saturation. So let me turn on my brush density to the highest point. Okay? And we're going to try and match it to this over time. Now, the way I've found to do that the best is to drop your brush density. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this again. And I'm going to do a couple coats. And we're going to see that it kind of gets darker along the way here. Now I'm going to do the same with my pink here, and I'll go the opposite direction. Now here's the thing. This isn't going to work the same way going across. It'll work the way from darkest to light, but not lightest to dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the darkness, and about right here in the middle point, I want to start to see that transition happen. Okay, So grabbing from my grays here, I'm going to shoot some of that into the pink, shoot some of that heavy saturation pink into the black, and I'm just going to keep building on this a little bit over time. I'm going to make my brush a little bigger just to kind of get the point across. So we'll go with this right here like this. Take this black, we'll come this way. Take this pink, we'll come this way. Take this black, we'll come again this way. Take this pink, we'll come again this way. And we'll start to accidentally make a gradient. And it takes time. And this is a technique that I taught in one of my most popular videos here on YouTube that everyone has learned to hate because I talk too much. And that's how to blend without a blender in Photoshop. And it's one of my most popular videos. And basically what you're doing is you're just building this form over time. And you begin to see about how the colors begin to just work together. And if you're not seeing it the way that I am, here's the quickest way to get there. So I'm going to go from the darkest black, and I'm just going to keep working my way across. And the other way. Okay. I see it there. But if you didn't see it, blender tool, make it pretty large, and blend across the grain. In time, you'll get something like that. But I would like that so much more with texture than without. This looks like a cloud, and that's not what the natural look of someone's face is. You don't want a cloud. You don't want billowy. You don't want fuzzy. You want edges. You want crisp. And that is why I love painting. If I am going to do a realism style of painting, that's why I am going to use a little bit more with a pencil or some kind of texture brush, but I do like using the pencil a lot. Let me just mess with this a little bit longer and see if I can figure out some more of these tones. And sometimes it's not about painting in that. Maybe you just want to add a blotch of red in there and then just blend. And maybe we'll go back with this color and just go right over top. There we go. I mean, this is all supposed to inspire anyway. You're supposed to just really get into this. And when you start to feel this, good things just happen. I'm going to spend a few minutes on this just because I can, and then I'll probably just speed it up in post. So just enjoy for a little bit, see if maybe I can throw in one of my songs that I wrote. By the way, if you want to check it out, go check out my other channel, Legacy Studio, where I have 1,300 subscribers on there, so you guys stopping over there would be really, really cool. Appreciate you guys for considering doing that. But I'll mess around with this a little bit, and we'll see what we can do with this. Quick note while I keep plugging here, the technique that I usually use the most with this kind of stuff is literally a cross-hatching technique. And it works really well. You cross-hatch in with your tones, and then you either blend them out or paint them out one way or another. And it just helps you, I mean, there's so many different ways to get to Rome, so many roads to get to Rome, but that's just the method that I use that leads me the quickest to my success, and you're gonna have one that leads you the quickest to yours. Now, I'm expecting that this lesson, that this effect that he tried to make was probably done by several different layers with several different 3, 2, 1. Now, the thing is, the way that he probably drew this was probably a bit different than what I'm doing, probably different than the painterly approach that I'm going with here. He may have used some different things where he used different layers with different saturations and different layer attributes and things to try and give it a different effect. Now, in saying that, the point that I'm trying to make is not you have to do it this way in comparison to the way that he was doing it, because most likely he was trying to do it Zai Ding's way, and Zai is incredible with working with different layers and how to create ambient shadow and highlight on one layer and create texture on another layer and then create a flat image on another layer and then merge them all together, and it just turns out to be this thing of beauty. But here's the thing. The importance of contrast and the importance of texture is still very important. And whether you do it my way or that way, contrast is still a very key thing that builds that makes that happen. And that's where I challenge my students to go that way. So it doesn't matter how you got from point A to point B. The point is, when you get to this stage, to remember to double check your contrast and make sure that you're happy with it. And that's really the best thing that you can do for yourself, is to check that contrast and make sure. Because no, this isn't perfect, but we can definitely see that features of this face are popping out much more than features off of the original face. I mean, just look at how much of a difference that is making to the final piece. And that's because, yes, I've oversaturated a lot of points, but in time, I would desaturate a lot of those and bring them back to a more natural tone. So all that highlight around the cheeks and the chin, that would end up being calmed down over time. But I'd much rather go too much and see the shapes of the face much more boldly and go, okay, it looks great, but it's coming out too far. So all I have to do is calm down those highlights, and suddenly that cheek starts to go in again. Remember that the more intense that is, the more the way that I say it, and it's very simplified, not in the quite the right way, but if you go with heavy highlight, it's like it's pulling everything out towards the camera, and if you go with heavy shadow, it's pushing things away from the camera, taking them into the distance. And so if you remember it like that, even though that's not the perfect term, if you can utilize that, basically whenever you add more light to the face and you work like on the top of a cheek, you add more light on the top and more shadow on the bottom, you're basically just making more of a ball, you're making more of a bubble. If you need to calm that down, simply calm down that contrast between those two tones, and suddenly that begins to go away. And that is just the fun part of it. So if you can go with a heavy contrast, a heavy saturation of what you're trying to do, so you can see an over-exaggeration of your form and go, whoa, okay, I really overdid that. Then you can start going, okay, well, let's calm that back, chill it out, and see if we can return some of that shaping back to the face. Make sense? You know what? I'm going to leave it at that. It's a long video, but I do hope that you guys liked it. Thank you so much for subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much to my amazing students who support me on Patreon. You can also join us on Patreon. The link is in the description below if you want to come join us in our classes. Right now we have plenty of room. I think we have room for about 4 more people. We can have 10 people on Discord in a single class, and if we get more than that, I will be more than happy to start up another class. We'll just do as many classes as we need to make sure we're covering all of our students. And I would say if we get about 10 students, then what we're going to do is we're going to start a brand new class that's going to be for beginners going right back to square one. But 9 times out of 10, you know what, you will enjoy our community, our Discord community, far more than you may enjoy our classes. The classes are great. I don't get any complaints about the classes, but when it comes down to it, the Discord community that has been created by our amazing students is really a place where you will grow the most, because it's different artists helping each other out, critiquing each other in the most gentle ways. We have an amazing family of artists, and it would be an honor to have you with us. That's going to do it for this video. I do hope that you've enjoyed that. Go and try it for yourself. Just try heavy contrast, try lots of highlight, lots of shadow, and then blend until it all mixes together. But don't blend so much that it turns into a fuzzy. Make sense? All right, God bless y'all. I'll see you next time right here on Draw Too Much. Bye.